Okay, this is going to be session 28, part 2, okay? Because for the second time, a phone call stopped the recording. All right, I got a phone call, but now I think I've got that situation under control, all right? I think putting the phone in airplane mode will prevent the phone call from coming through and stopping the video. We'll see. Okay. So, at any rate, we were finishing up page 63, paragraph 6, in the section called "This Need Not Be." All right? In the chapter called "The Illusions of the Ego." All right? The ego is the world of illusions, make-believe, right? And it seems very real, okay? And at the end of paragraph 6, Jesus reminds us, he says, you are not sufficiently vigilant against the demands of the ego, right? You're not sufficiently vigilant against the demands of the ego to disengage yourself from the ego, right? And yet he repeats, this need not be. It doesn't have to be this way. You can be. You can become vigilant against all the, vigilant for the calls of the ego. You know, it just reminds me of because we're coming up on the springtime and Easter in the Christian traditions, that Jesus spent 40 days in the desert and he was tempted, all right? He was tempted with, power and wealth and all these things. And he said, no. And so that's, basically an example of, being vigilant for the illusions of the ego. The ego's going to offer us all kinds of things, right? And whether it's in form or it's psychological. Like you're going to get satisfaction, you're going to get revenge, you're going to show them, all these things. These are ego responses because only the ego can feel resentment. Only the ego feels attacked. So he says, it doesn't have to be that way because we have a powerful mind that can choose. It can choose to see things through the eyes of peace. So let's look at paragraph 7 on page 63 at the bottom, where it says, the habit of engaging with God and his creations is easily made if you actively refuse to let your mind slip away. The problem is not one of concentration. It is the belief that no one, including yourself, is worth consistent effort. Side with me consistently against this deception, and do not permit this shabby belief to pull you back. The disheartened are useless to themselves and to me, but only the ego can be disheartened. Right? And he's saying it's the habit of engaging with God, right? The habit of going to the right mind, right? Engaging with God and his creations. Right? He says it's easily made. You can make it a habit. If you actively refuse to let your mind slip away. Right? As we said in part 1, that idea that your car is drifting. All right, now they have all kinds of beepers and sounds that will let you know when you're going out of your lane. Okay? And that's what we have to do. We have to realize when we're going off into the ego thought system, right? And as he said in the beginning, he says, you're going in the ego thought system if you're not joyous. All right? Later on, he'll say it differently. He'll say, is peace in your awareness? All right? You know, it's like, how do you feel? Okay? And by the way, you know, you feel, you know which side of your mind you're using, so to speak, which guide you're using. You're letting the ego tell you what existence is about, or are we allowing Jesus and the Holy Spirit to remind us what our existence is all about? Okay? And he says, the habit of engaging with God is easily made if you actively refuse to let your mind slip away. And the way we do that is by noticing, oh, I'm slipping, wait, let me get back. I don't want that anymore. I don't want the anger, I don't want the resentment, I don't want the fear, right? I don't want the loneliness, I don't want the sadness. I just don't want it. So I come back and I take Jesus' hand and I say, okay, show me how to see things differently. And he says the problem is not, the problem of developing that habit is not one of concentration. Because your mind is very powerful. You can concentrate if you need to, if you want to. He says the problem is the belief that you're not worth it. You're not worth the consistent effort that it takes to notice, oh, that's ego, I don't want it, I don't want it. All right? You're not worth the effort. But he says, side with me consistently against this deception, because that's a lie. You think you're not worth it? You're not worth the effort? So that's a lie. You're believing a lie about yourself. Right? Even if it's something that most of us keep very secret, that we secretly don't like ourselves. In one of the 365 lessons, it begins with the sentence that says, you think you are the home of evil, darkness, and sin. And people, upon noticing that, would recoil from you as if from a snake. Right? He says, that's what you think about yourself. He says that you're believing a lie. Because the truth about yourself is that you are glorious. You are this magnificent creation of a magnificent creator. Okay? You are the offspring of the original source. You need nothing. He says, side with me consistently against this deception and do not permit this shabby belief to pull you back. Right? You are worth the effort. Put the effort in. And he says, the disheartened are useless to themselves and to me. All right? If we're disheartened, if we believe we're these, these horrible people, these sinful people, I'm such a sinner, oh, I did something wrong. He says, you're useless to yourself. Right? You're going to keep perpetuating that belief system. He goes, but only the ego can be disheartened, right? In your true self, in your true incarnation, there is no such thing as being disheartened. There's only joy. There's only gratitude. Right? There's only happiness and peace and abundance and invulnerability. Right? You can't be disheartened. Only the ego can be disheartened. In paragraph 8, he says, have you really considered how many opportunities you have had to gladden yourself and how many of them you have refused? So there is no limit to the power of a Son of God, but he can limit the expression of his power as much as he chooses. Your mind and mine can unite in shining your ego away, releasing the strength of God into everything you think and do. Do not settle for anything less than this, and refuse to accept anything but this as your goal. watch your mind carefully for any beliefs that hinder its accomplishment, and step away from them. Judge how well you have done this by your own feelings, for this is the one right use of judgment. Judgment, like any other defense, can be used to attack or protect, to hurt or to heal. The ego should be brought to judgment and found wanting there. Without your own allegiance, protection, and love, the ego cannot exist. Let it be judged truly, and you must withdraw allegiance, protection, and love from it. Right. So if we judge the ego truly, we will no longer love it and protect it and have allegiance to it. Right. The ego, the home of negativity. The home of sin, guilt, and fear. Right? I don't want that anymore. Right? And he says, you can limit yourself as much as you choose. And he keeps reminding us it's a choice. Right? I'm not worthy. All right? He says, but your mind and mine can unite in shining your ego away. When we unite with Jesus and we ask him, help me to see this correctly, that's uniting our mind. The ego is shined away. Right? Releasing the strength of God into everything you think and do. Right? So the ego is shined away, and what's left is my true self, my channeling, so to speak. I become a conduit of God's love, right? And all that exists in heaven enters into everything that I think, everything that I do, everything that I say. It's got the foundation of love and truth, right? And in that situation, this is what Jesus will later on refer to as the real world, in which we remain for a while and we're visible to others and others are visible to us. But we're channeling, so to speak. We're the conduits of love. All right? We have shined away the ego, united with Jesus. And the strength of God comes into everything we think and do. And he says, don't settle for anything less. Right? And don't refuse, he says, and refuse to accept anything but this as your goal. And it's just so possible. He says, and basically he's going to tell you it's inevitable. Sooner or later, you will decide, I don't want this anymore. I don't want this hellish existence. Right? And he says, and inevitably, you will let the strength of God shine through everything that you say and do, everything that you think. All right. So he says, don't settle for anything less and refuse to accept anything but this as your goal. And he repeats, watch your mind carefully for any beliefs that hinder its accomplishment and step away from them. You know, any ideas of fear and sadness and anger, and he says, watch your mind for that and step away from these things. All right? And you can judge how well you're doing by how you feel. You know, a lot of people would ask, I don't know how to judge my progress in the course. And Jesus would say the only way you could do that is peace in your awareness. How do you feel? Are you joyous? Are you happy? Right? If not, you come back and you ask, how can I be joyous? All right? I really want my happiness. All right? And he says, so judge how well you have done this by your own feelings. For that's the right use of judgment. He says, judgment, like any other defense, can be used to attack or to protect. Right? Judgment can be used to hurt or to heal. Right? And the way it heals is when we're judging the ego. We say, no, that's wrong. I don't want that. I don't want that anymore. So he says the ego should be brought to judgment and found wanting. So the ego doesn't exist without my allegiance to it, without my protection. All right? Let it be judged truly, and you'll withdraw your allegiance and your protection and your love. Okay? Just a little side note on language and things. Like I always say, one of my favorite words in the course is relinquish. All right? And this is he's saying that, but just in different terms. He's saying, when he says, watch your mind carefully for any beliefs that hinder the accomplishment of your goal. He goes, watch the mind for them, all right, and step away from them. That's relinquishment. You put them down, step away. All right. Let's go on to paragraph 9. So he says, let that ego go. Keep your eyes on the goal, right? Because you are a mirror of truth in which God himself shines in perfect light. You are the reflection of God. To the ego's dark glass, you need but say, I will not look there because I know these images are not true. Then let the Holy One shine on you in peace, knowing that this and only this must be. His mind shone on you in your creation and brought your mind into being. His mind still shines on you and must shine through you. Your ego cannot prevent him from shining on you, but it can prevent you from letting him shine through you. So he's telling us that the mind of God, all right, shone on you, and you were created. All right? The mind of God extended, and you were created. So the mind of God is shining on you, and it still does. It always will. It never ceases. Right? The only thing that prevents us from being aware of that is the ego thought system, which says, no, I separated from that. Right? I separated from that. Now I don't have it anymore. That's not who I am. I'm this individual. Right? So he says, it doesn't prevent God's light from shining on you, it just prevents it from coming through you. And when we reconnect with the right mind, with the memory of who we are, it shines through us. And it shines through everything that we do, everything we say. Everything has that foundation in truth. Right? And later on he'll say, if you need a word, it comes up for you. If you need to do something, you'll think of the right thing to do because you'll be guided. Right? His mind still shines on you and must shine through you. Right? Your ego cannot prevent him from shining on you, but it can prevent you from letting him shine through you. And that's what he says in the beginning of this book. This course is not about love, it's about learning to remove the blocks to the awareness of love. Right? And then it shines through us when we remove the blocks. We remove all the scraps of fear. We remove all the little pieces of ego, all the resentments, all the angers, all the fears, all the guilt. Then in paragraph 10, he says, the first coming of Christ is merely another name for the creation. For Christ is the Son of God. All right? And that's you. That's what he was just saying. The mind of God shone on you in your creation, and the Christ was created. That was the first creation, he's saying. All right? The second coming, all right, the first coming, I should say, the first coming of Christ was your creation. All right? And he says, and to believe otherwise is not humility. All right? It's just the ego telling you you're not worthy. All right? And he says the second coming of Christ means nothing more than the end of the ego's rule and the healing of the mind. Right? The second coming is the awareness of what always was. Right? It's the dissolution of the ego thought system that says, I'm separate, I'm guilty, I'm fearful, I'm going to get punished. I deserve it. I deserve punishment. So the second coming is the awareness of the original condition, the awareness of your original peace, your original innocence. So the second coming of Christ means nothing more than the end of the ego's rule and the healing of the mind. The mind is no longer split. He says, I was created like you in the first creation, the first coming, just like you. And I have called to you to join with me in the second. He says, so join me in the second coming, in the awareness of who you really are. He says, I'm in charge of the second coming. Jesus says, I'm in charge of the second coming. And my judgment, which is used only for protection, my judgment cannot be wrong because it never attacks. I'm not judging you. Right? My judgment is that the ego is false. That's what he's telling us. Jesus' judgment is that the ego doesn't exist. There's only your innocence. Okay? That's why it's his judgment is a protection. It protects your innocence. It reinforces it. All right? And he says, and it cannot be wrong because it never attacks. He says, your judgment, yours may be so distorted that you believe I was mistaken in choosing you. I assure you, this is a mistake of your ego. All right? So he says, your judgment of yourself may be so distorted that you just say, no, it can't be me. You know, I'm going to join with Jesus and we're going to shine away the ego. All right? We're going to reflect the glory of God. We're going to reflect who we truly are. Can't be me. All right? Look at, this is who I am. You know, and I bring out my list of things that are wrong with me, things that I've done, or whatever, things that I think about myself. He says, so your judgment of yourself could be so distorted that you believe that I made a mistake in choosing you. So Jesus made a mistake choosing me. He goes, I assure you, this is a mistake of your ego. He says, your ego's making a mistake, not me. Because, right? Do not mistake it for humility. All right? For your ego is trying to convince you that it is real and I am not. Because if I am real, I am no more real than you. All right? In other words, if I am the Son of God, I'm no more the Son of God than you are. If I am real, I'm no more real than you. So your ego, in order to maintain its existence, says, no, it can't be you. He's making a mistake. You know, you're just this silly doofus stumbling through life, trying not to get caught. He says, that's just a mistake of your ego. Don't think it's humility. All right? The ego is very arrogant. He says, your ego is trying to tell you that I'm not real. Because if I'm real, the ego is not. And if I'm real, I'm no more real than you. And he says, that knowledge, and I assure you it is knowledge, means that Christ has come into your mind and healed it. Right? When I realize that Jesus and I are the same, He says, that knowledge has come into your mind and healed it. All right? The knowledge of Christ has come into your mind and healed the split. All right? There's no more ego. There's no more choice to be made. The choice has been realized. And then Jesus reminds us, he says, I don't attack your ego. I do not attack your ego. I do work with your higher mind, the home of the Holy Spirit, whether you're asleep or awake, just as your ego does with your lower mind, which is its home. I am your vigilance in this, because you are too confused to recognize your own hope. I am not mistaken. Your mind will elect to join with mine, and together we are invincible. You and your brother will yet come together in my name, and your sanity will be restored. He says, I raised the dead by knowing that life is an eternal attribute of everything that the living God created. Why do you believe it's harder for me to inspire the dispirited or to stabilize the unstable? I do not believe that there is an order of difficulty in miracles. You do. I have called, and you will answer. I understand that miracles are natural because they are expressions of love. My calling you is as natural as your answer and as inevitable. Right? He says, me calling to you is natural, and your answer is natural and inevitable. Sooner or later, you're going to get it. You're going to find out. You're going to come to the realization, oh, I never left God's mind. I never wandered into the far country. Right? That never happened. He says, Jesus says, I don't attack your ego. He says, I don't blot it out. All right? Because your mind is powerful. You have to make the choice. I don't block out the ego. Remember, he said early on, he says, I came to start from the bottom up, right? To help us with the ego. Right? I don't just wipe it out, press a button and say, okay, you're home now. Let's go. Time for dinner. So I don't attack your ego. He says, I work with your higher mind. All right? And I work with it whether you're sleeping or you're awake. Right? Because the ego does the same thing. Whether you're sleeping or you're awake, the ego is very active. Right? If you're a person that remembers your dreams, you could see the ego throws up some scary or confusing or some crazy stuff, while we're sleeping. So the ego's working with the lower mind, as Jesus calls it. And it's a good distinction to think that we go to the higher mind to find the answers. We go to the higher mind to sit in the stately calm within the higher mind, where Jesus, our higher self, resides in the higher mind. All right? He says, I am your vigilance in this. Because you're too confused to recognize your own hope. Right? Jesus is that part of our mind that is already judged against the ego, chosen, no, I don't want that. I remain with my Father. Right? So he's the part of our mind that has chosen. Right? He's the cornerstone. And we are that. I think basically what he's saying is that I'm holding that space for you. Right? I'm holding that space for you because right now you're a little too confused. Right? You're too confused to realize where your own hope is. And the hope is in the right mind, where the atonement principle is, which says that you are innocent. You never left the mind of God. That's where the hope is. Right? Because the hopelessness begins when we believe, oh, I left the mind of God. I left the garden. Right? And he says very succinctly, I am not mistaken. Right? And he assures us, he says, your mind will elect to join with mine. He says, you will. Sooner or later, you'll have to say that there has to be a better way. I can't do this anymore. All right? I can't take it. And he says, and together, he says, when you join with me, we're invincible. Nothing that the ego throws against us can do anything to us. All right? You and your brother will yet come together in my name. All right? And your sanity will be restored. And he always uses that idea of, he'll say the ark of peace is entered 2 by 2. You and your brother will come to me. All right? You'll come together in my name. All right? In other words, we won't see any distinctions between us. There won't be anything to point out. There will be no projections of guilt. All right? We will recognize each other for who we are. We are part of the oneness. Right? He says, you'll come together in my name, and your sanity will be restored. In other words, the health of your mind will be restored. That word sanity, it comes from the Latin word sano, which is health. Health. So to be insane means you're not healthy, simply speaking, which is always talking about the mind. So when you're insane, your mind is not well. All right? The Romans had a saying, Menssana in corpore sano, a sound mind and a sound body. And that's where the word sane came from. So Jesus is using that. As a former studier of poetry, you get to appreciate the poet's use of words. They pick words out specifically to paint the image, right? To give the idea. Your sanity will be restored. He says, I raise the dead by knowing that life is an eternal attribute of everything. All right? Life is an eternal attribute of everything God created. So by tapping into that awareness, he was able to raise the dead. He says, so if I could do that, what makes you think it's harder to help you out when you're depressed, when you're dispirited, when you're in the ego? He says, you think that's harder? He says, I don't see any order of difficulty. All right? There's one problem, one solution. The problem is, you think you left God. You think you separated from God. That's the problem. The solution is reminding you that you didn't leave. You're still as glorious as ever. And in that gloriousness, you are joyous. All right? He says, I raise the dead by knowing that life is an eternal attribute of everything that the living God created. Why do you believe it's harder for me to inspire the dispirited or to stabilize the unstable? He says, there's no order of difficulty. I do not believe that there's an order of difficulty in miracles. You do. You think one thing is harder than the other. You think there's a difference. He says, I have called and you will answer. Simple. I understand that miracles are natural, that change in perception, that change of perspective, right? That going to the mind, realizing that you have a mind and there's a choice, he goes, it's a natural thing to do, he says. Because they're expressions of love. Having the perception change becomes an expression of love. So it's a natural thing, because that's your true existence. And he says, so my calling you is as natural as your answer, right? And as inevitable. Right? That's a good reason to not be dispirited, is to remember that reuniting with who you really are is inevitable. Right? You're not eternally cast into hell. Right? You're not internally cast into the ego. It's inevitable that you will remember. You will remember Christ. You will remember who you are and where you fit in. Okay. And that this ego system need not be. Right? It is a choice. Okay? And when you feel bad, you just remember you chose the wrong thing. So this need not be. All right? Just like that phone call that interrupted the first session. Need not be. Okay. And so it need not was. All right. And so I will see yous presently, and I'll see you in session 29. All right. And be vigilant. Choose wisely. Ask yourself, how do I feel? All righty then. Bye now.